cherry on top of the cake, how to develop a great conclusion. It's in the mouth of the oven that the bread gets burnt. My parents and teachers always said this to me when I was growing up, and it really had a very intense effect on the way I started thinking about the importance of finishing things the right way. However, in public speaking, I had always had a struggle on finishing presentations properly, even though the conclusion is like the cherry on the top of the cake that really wraps around a great presentation. This is a reason for me to show you several points on the role they serve, their parts and types of endings and purposes, and of course, tips on what not to do. Conclusions are important, but it is more important to explain why they are. They have several purposes which really explain their use. Tying everything that was said. A good conclusion condenses everything of the information and makes it easier to remember, and it also ties it to people's memories and minds. It signals the key elements and refreshes them one last time. And also closure. It gives a gradual stop instead of a full abrupt stop, because it can leave people confused on what was the presentation all about. It is always important to signal the end, prepare audiences, wrap up, and finish. Given that I now explained the purpose of a conclusion, I'm going to show you several steps in order to develop it, to use it as a framework. Depending on the context and purpose of the presentation, there are several ways of doing so. Regardless, generally, the first step is to restate the thesis in order to tie the start with the end of the presentation. The idea is to re-emphasize the points because repetition is really important in oral communication. Of course, there are questions you can ask yourself in order to think how to restate the thesis, but the most important one right now is, what's the point? Will this information change the recipient's life? Will it convince them of taking a certain course of action? And if it does, how? Step 2 is to review the main points of the presentation. In the same way an introduction would preview the information that was going to be said in a presentation, a conclusion restates the essential elements of those arguments given. The word choice is important because depending on the purpose of your presentation, whether it's informing or persuading, there's a different word choice that you're going to use. Of course, each case comes up with a different wording. You should think about the main pieces that you used in order to convince or inform the audience and review them for them to remember. It is everything about what you would like them to think about your presentation and remember about it. Step 3 is to use a concluding device that will serve as the last element that will make your presentation memorable. It is also heavily influenced by context and purpose. The formulation will depend on the desired effect you want on your audience. There are generally two purposes on our presentations, to inform and to persuade. Different devices have different effects. Generally, you would like to persuade someone to do something or to feel about a certain way about a certain topic, or give useful information about a product or idea. For a persuasive goal, you could finish with some advice based on your arguments and ideas given on your presentation, or you could reference the audience, listing all the benefits of the things that they could do that you talked about in the presentation, and of course the benefits that it would give to them. And as the goal is informative, you could inspire towards a certain motion, not necessarily an action that you want them to do. You could use emotional appeal such as questions, poems, or stories. You could also visualize the future of the topic of what you talked about and its significance to the audience in order to make them think about what you presented. Another very important thing to explain is things that shouldn't be done in a conclusion, such as using generic phrases like in conclusion or in summary, uh, putting the thesis only at the end instead of the start in the introduction where it should be, making abrupt stops that can make feel the presentation empty, and introducing new information that can destroy the format of the structure of the presentation and make it confusing. Given that none of us would like to burn a bread that we've devoting a lot of amount of time to, you wouldn't like to finish a presentation with a weak conclusion and lose all the work done just at the very end. Now, if you review the important purposes and structure of a conclusion that I gave you and think about the possible devices you could use to make it more memorable, you're gonna make presentations that feel more complete and fuller and that have a great lasting impression. And just as the creator of Forbes, PC Forbes said, how you start is important, but it is how you finish that counts.